Good day, my name is Bluesuit and today I'll be going over my review of the action-packed precision fighting roguelite kung fu revenge story known as Sifu. In Sifu you play as the child of a martial arts legend in China. As a youth you watched as your father's ex-disciples murdered him in his home and you vowed revenge against the men and women that he once trusted. Fast forward 8 years as the game begins and you've now dedicated your life to kung fu so that you can hunt down these 5 mystical martial artists to deliver swift and bloody justice. Sifu begins when you're 20 years old and comes with a unique death mechanic that ages you. Essentially every time you die your death counter goes up and your age increases by the number of your death counter. So your first death would bring you to age 21, but your second death would bring you to age 23 and then 26, and so on, with a handful of ways to lower or reset your death counter, but not your age. This mechanic brings a lot of unique elements to Sifu that can be highly frustrating, but also build the foundation for many of the game's systems. First of all, nobody lives forever and Sifu is very much a roguelite. So whenever you make it over the age of 70, your next death will end the game for you. There are fortunately several bits of progression that you get to keep though after dying, so not all is lost. The first are your combat abilities. When defeating foes, you'll gain experience points, and you can use those to unlock new moves like the slide kick that lets you sprint at enemies and knock them down by sliding into their legs, or the weapon catch that lets you catch an enemy projectile. These additional skills give players more options in fights to dispatch their foes, but it can get pretty grindy if you want to unlock them all. Each one needs to be initially unlocked, and then you'll have to pay their cost 5 more times to make them available for every run, and that initial cost has to be paid each run until you've got it unlocked permanently. Fortunately, none of them are required to progress the game though. Another great thing that you'll keep is your level progression. There are 5 big parts of the city that you'll have to conquer, and you always start the first, known as the squats, at age 20. For every other level, you're allowed to start it at whatever youngest age you were when you beat the previous level. So if you're able to master the first level and make it all the way through without a single death, then you can start level 2, known as the club, at age 20 as well. This not only feels incredibly satisfying when you're blowing through once difficult enemies without a scratch, but it also gives you a better fighting chance at the rest of the game since you'll be starting at a lower age. The second big impact that the aging mechanic brings is that the effect can snowball quickly if you're up against difficult fights, particularly bosses. Each time they kill you, you age by an additional year, causing you to fly through decades of your life and potentially only a couple of deaths, which can come after only 1 or 2 missteps in combat. Additionally, every 10 years that you age, you lose a chunk of your max health, while your damage increases proportionally. Combat in Sifu works very similar to Sekiro. You have health, structure, and focus. With each blocked attack, your structure will slowly build up, and if it breaks, then your enemy will have a huge window for damage. And focus builds up as you land hits, and allows you to perform extra powerful combat techniques, such as raking someone in the eyes or kicking them off their feet. Sifu's combat is very deep, and like me, most players will likely find it pretty overwhelming when they're first starting out. There is a practice arena that I highly recommend, but most fights will feel crushing at first. Enemies don't wait their turn to attack you, and you'll have to use every resource to win fights. Sometimes this means exploiting the environment to bottleneck enemies, and other times it means running around an open bar hucking beer bottles at your enemies' heads to whittle down their forces. And I honestly wouldn't recommend Sifu if you aren't into games where you die a lot, but if you are, the satisfaction of overcoming these challenges is second to none. Being able to crush a room full of enemies without a scratch is a great feeling, especially when you're doing it with the same tools you had when you didn't stand a chance. And the fact that the hits and collisions are so brutal and heavy just makes it all the better. Bosses in Sifu are just as satisfying and very memorable, while serving as skill checks to move on to the next level. Each one is only winnable as long as you know certain mechanics, and until you figure out what those are, they definitely feel impossible, especially since combat is only ever vaguely explained to you. The fighter, for example, wields a huge staff that breaks down your structure fast and can even kill you with a single combo. But studying his combos carefully will let you know which attacks to block and which to duck under, giving you precious time to get in free damage. However, as these fights go on, enemies get stronger and faster and start using new moves that really make it tense all the way down to the final blow. Sifu isn't without its faults, however, and there are a few that could be turnoffs to some players. The first is that the camera can really become another enemy in many fights. There's no lock-on or camera reset button, and many fights pit you against enemies in all directions. So while you're inputting commands for special moves and combos, you'll also need to be moving the camera around to check for incoming attackers. I don't think there should be a lock-on, because fights are really fluid the way they are and it's better this way, but having the option to zoom out more or snap the camera behind your character quickly would give players more control and situational awareness. Presentation-wise, I only noticed minor dips in performance on PC, but Sifu definitely seems to have poor controller support, as none of my controllers worked and I was forced to download a third-party software to get it to recognize. And the last thing is how linear most of the game feels. With a few exceptions, Sifu's levels have you traveling down the same corridors, fighting the same enemies over and over again. And while mastering these takes a lot of time, once you've beaten the game, there really isn't much of a reason to go back through it, because it won't be that different the second time. You can pick up Sifu right now on PlayStation and Epic Game Store for $40. And while it's not worth that for most players, it does come extremely close for several reasons. The overall combat is an absolute joy to behold once you learn its ins and outs, with every single fight offering something satisfying. Additionally, it's an incredibly unique experience as a Kung Fu Souls-like roguelite with a great authentic soundtrack and an addicting gameplay loop. However, once the credits roll on your 20-ish hour journey, there remain few reasons to return to the game. So I'm valuing Sifu at $37, and I highly recommend it to players who love the painfully rewarding fights of Souls-likes, and don't mind giving up that essence of replayability. I hope you enjoyed this review of Sifu. Come see me on Twitch where you can watch our reviews in progress. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Until next time.